So, good morning, everybody, or good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Margot Waldorf, and I am the founder of the Change Awards. However, today I have an enormous privilege to be joined by a lovely Sally Harp from the Alliance Farmers Produce. Sally and the team have won one of the very exciting Change Awards this year in 2025. And the team, we were just reminiscing prior to this recording that the team was very excited when we were sharing this with them whilst on the call because everybody is actually based in New Zealand. Um, Luckily, we had a colleague from the UK who came in and collect the award. And today we will be talking about a project which we called it from proxy. Well, not me, Sally has called it from proxy to partnership. How change and project collaboration have turned on the ERP implementation. And Sally is going to give you a little bit of a background on how things were when the team put their hands on the implementation, and she is also going to tell you how they have turned into something better. And I, as a person who have read the case study that was submitted to us, I can tell you straight away that it was phenomenally done, and I was really very much impressed. But before we do that, I also wanted to bring to your attention two additional things. So we've got some Change Docs masterclasses which are upcoming, and also Change Doc masterclasses which have taken place. I am not going to read through this on the screen, but all of that is available on our Change Awards website. And if you wanted to see some of the recordings and learn a little bit about how change is done in practice, you can give us a shout, or you can just access them on our website, or join one of our next sessions. So, without further ado, I am going to hand over to Sally and try to pin her to the screen. So, bear with me as I take care of the technicalities. And in the meanwhile, Sally, welcome, and I'm handing over to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Margot, for that beautiful introduction. It is great to be here joining you all to have a masterclass around change and project partnership. I'll just get my slides up there. So thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. So my name is Sally Harb, and I'm the head of People, Talent and Transformation at Alliance Group. So we bring gorgeous grass-fed lamb and beef to the world from wonderful Aotearoa, New Zealand. So good evening to those of you in the Northern Hemisphere. It is a very early 5 o'clock in the morning here in New Zealand. And over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through the detail around how we use change in project collaboration to really turn the tide on our ERP implementation and deliver incredible business outcomes for our ERP program. So what we're going to do today, I'll just take you through kind of the context about where we started this change and project journey and where we got to. I'll talk a little bit about the change, which, as I mentioned, was the implementation of an ERP inventory management system in a manufacturing environment. But a lot of what we did here, the principles, the approaches, and the things that worked are highly transferable. So regardless of whatever transformation or change you are looking at, a lot of what we're going to talk about today, I know you'll be able to adopt some of these things to maximize the success wherever it is that you are. I'll take you through our key approaches and the critical success factors, which allowed our people readiness to deliver the business outcomes that we required. And then I'll talk to you a little about some of the lessons that we learned and reflections about what it meant for us to win this Global Change Award in the category of project and change partnership. One of the things I think that's so tremendously important is coming together in forums like this, where we can really share as change practitioners what are some of the things that are getting in the way of us achieving the outcomes that we really require. And so I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Margot and the rest of the team for creating this Change Award and for creating this environment where we can provide a recording like this for people to come back and have a look at some of the things that we've done and how they might be able to apply those in their own situation. In terms of the context, so where we start this change journey is we were part of a multi-phase ERP program, which had already had some really tremendously successful deliveries in our standard modules. So these are things like HR modules, procurement and finance modules. And where this kind of story really begins is the first time our organization went to deploy one of the bespoke modules for our organization, we found that there was quite a big impact to business velocity and master data. And so, what the organization really needed to do was take stock and say, what was the defining factor between our go lives that were extraordinarily successful and the one that we feel like we could have been a little bit more efficient and returned to business velocity a little bit more quickly? What was really great about that post go live review is it really identified an issue with the change in learning resources all reporting into the project forum. And so, what the decision was made as a business was to establish an independent change and learning team, which was part of the permanent organization structure. And so, that's where I joined this alliance organization, primarily to establish the change and learning function to support the program for this upcoming go live, and then also create a change in learning capability for the business that would endure beyond the temporary project phases. And this phase that we were looking at was really to deliver a new capability around inventory management. And for those who are in a similar industry, we know that this is going to have significant impacts in our manufacturing areas and also a number of supporting divisions who are involved in that inventory management process. If we take a look about what that change was, if we get into the detail a little bit more, the inventory management software is what the business thought they were implementing. But I think as change practitioners, it's really important that we change the focus from the software and we start thinking about the business capability that we're trying to enable, we're trying to accelerate, or we're trying to introduce. So for those of you who are already in this industry, you know very much that implementation of a system really relies on changing the processes that enable the business capability, accelerating that with the right tools and technologies. But most importantly, it's going to be about changing mindsets about how we do business, what the protocols and the business rules are, and how it is important that every link of the chain works in tandem to make sure that the business outcomes can be achieved. In this particular go live, we were looking at over 500 people who were distributed regionally. So we had 7 different manufacturing plants and over 20 specialist teams in those supporting areas. For example, our finance team, our planning team, logistics team, and so on. And I think what's really important to notice is that we had quite a wide variety of people being impacted in different ways. And I think as change practitioners or as project specialists, this is really where you need to stop and think about who is impacted and how, and do some work around prioritizing where you're going to invest the most amount of time based on impact, based on risk, and based on readiness. In our particular instance, we had a lot of frontline manufacturing workers. And so we had quite a wide variety of tech literacy. We had our absolute technical digital natives who are used to doing everything digitally. But we also had people who had been using the same system, for 40 years or more. And so we really had to build that into our learning approach, how we were going to address those particular audiences in different ways. And many of you will be involved in industry where you really have a limited ability to take large groups of people away from their day job in order to attend classroom learning. And so that's where we really had an amazing learning function who really looked at what this training program was going to look like and how we could use sort of innovative ways in terms of familiarization, kind of in plant. 1-page kind of cheat sheets at the point of need, and how we could really use familiarization to really shift that learning curve so that by the time it was our go live week, we had a seamless switch over into BAU. If I think about some of the key approaches that we took to really shift the dial, as I spoke before, one of the challenges that we had faced in the past was when the change and learning resources reported into the project or the program lead, we found that often those high quality practitioners with specialist skill sets were often being given duties that could have been done by a wide variety of project resources. So I think one thing that's really critical as a change practitioner is having absolute clarity on what does top of scope look like for change practitioners and how you can avoid having your change resources being caught up in the general grind of kind of project delivery, and that we're really taking our change specialists and utilizing them to focus on the people readiness and the adoption and benefit aspect of project delivery. With our particular approach, we were able to establish the change lead and the change specialist as trusted advisors to the project as well as trusted advisors to the business. And I often like to think about the change practice as drawing the connections between these two entities who all have a common goal and making sure that you're doing the work to protect the business from any risk that is inherent in a large go live like this, as well as protecting the project from the risk that our business folk pose to the project being delivered, to the time, cost, and quality parameters that are required by the business. What we did in terms of getting that change readiness across our organization was create some grassroots change networks in our locations where the biggest impacts would be felt. Now, I'm sure you would all agree, the person that most people want to hear from about expectations and change is going to be their line manager or their senior leader or the executive leader who is accountable and responsible for that area. That massive sponsorship and that buy-in from the leaders and the middle managers is how people know that they are to prioritize this work over and above everything else that might be on their plate. So we know that those established flow down networks are the best way of getting the right person to talk to the right people. But we also know that the fidelity of the message can change based on the number of hands that it goes through. If you perhaps have people in that chain who are not fully informed or not fully bought in, sometimes the message that reaches the person who needs to know it has moved a little bit from where it started. So I think it's really important that in addition to your formal communication channels through hierarchy lines, you create a sideways across messaging that allows the most important engagement and communication facts to reach those who need to know it directly from those who are in the know. So our change chain networks across the 7 plants allowed people who were in the business to meet regularly, hear directly from the project and the change team about what it is they needed to know for the upcoming period. And it also provided a really important two-way communication line where risks, issues, and other things that we are hearing in the business can be passed back directly to those who are able to make the change and remove the barriers and solve the problems that our people are seeing. The other really important pillar of our approach was change leadership. So there was probably a perception that a change team or a learning team are really going to get out there in the business. They're going to be creating communications. They're going to be hosting meetings. They're going to be overcoming resistance. Now, all of this is true to an extent, but your biggest asset as a change team is leveraging those people who exist within the business already to become those change leaders and to become those change champions so that the message is coming from within, from credible, trusted resources who already sit within the business. That's also going to be a way of maintaining a smaller specialized change team and then leveraging resources that exist within the business for a far more cost-effective approach to landing your change. So our change leadership workshops were really around empowering and educating managers on how they were so critical in driving business adoption and that the responsibility for ensuring readiness sat with them within their teams to make sure the new ways of working that were being rolled out were going to be able to deliver the business outcomes expected of that area. We introduced a number of skills, tools, techniques, and coaching to wrap around those change leadership workshops, which was super successful. And the final bit I've got down the bottom, of course, is you need to be directing or a member of a really high performing change and learning team. And so we need to make sure that our practitioners are really clear on their roles, their responsibilities, the principles to which we operate, and the scope boundaries to make sure that they are focusing on the things that we know only change practitioners are able to deliver. If you can lead a team like that, providing them with the empowerment to deliver the outcomes while retaining the central leadership that looks at risk and barriers removal, you're absolutely on the right path there. If we move on to think about some of the critical success factors that really allowed our project to bring the business in upon the journey and make sure that we were ready and able to move into a seamless transition to BAU, there are a couple of things that we did which really turned the tide and made the difference. So, one of the most important things we did was to establish our business integration group. Now, this business forum, I've seen it in many places under many different names. It could be a working group, it could be an advisory forum. But what is super important is you are regularly bringing together the senior leaders of the areas who are impacted from right across your organization so that they are able to hear firsthand where the project is at, where the business readiness is at, what is coming up in the next 2 to 4 weeks, and really provide them with the confidence that the engine which is driving out this change truly understands the business and that they are able to provide to their business areas absolute confidence and absolute direction about where we're going and what this change is going to bring in terms of expectations and benefits for their people. So introducing this business integration group really allowed the project and change leaders to have direct contact to those in the business who are going to be the owners of the outputs of this particular initiative. It allowed them to cross-check requirements, issues, assumptions, and allowed the business to make recommendations for the project team to take to the steerco and the executive level, knowing that these had been validated and endorsed by those who were at the coalface. The second change that we made, which was an absolute critical success factor here, was making sure that a senior change member was an independent advisory positioned on the steering committee. Now, we know that change practitioners are the natural kind of tension between the project and the business. And so it's really important that a change practitioner has a voice on steering. In our particular instance, we made sure that change was able to produce a readiness report at the formal steering, which had its own independent red, amber, green on how we were going in terms of people readiness, people risk, adoption, and benefits tracking. So when we were able to place change on the steerco, we found that there was a much more robust conversation about risks, issues, expectations, and go live benefits. And so that really allowed us to guide the decision making and give our executive absolute confidence when it was time for our go, no go conversations. The final pillar that we had here in terms of critical success factors was really around building a culture of transparent decision making. I know most of you on the call here who are change practitioners really understand that the gap between expectation and reality is where you get the kind of worst outcomes. And so it's really important that although we focus on benefits and what the positives are, I think it's also important that we're really honest about introducing new ways of working, new tools, and new technologies is going to come with some frustration. It's going to come with some challenges. And I think the more that we can have those honest conversations with our people, it equips them for the reality of go live. And it also makes sure our senior leaders are really clear that although our ultimate goal is better efficiency and better outcomes, you may not always see that in the first 24, 48 hours as our business adopts the new ways of working. The transparent decision making was really fantastic and made sure that there was a voice at the table thinking about human factors such as engagement, such as burnout, such as readiness. And that really allowed us for positioning our business teams for success in this go live. If we move along and think about what were some of the outcomes that we were able to achieve. So we've talked about the importance of ensuring that if your change and learning team doesn't report into the business, that they have a really key senior business sponsor who is looking at the adoption, the benefits, and the people readiness as a primary focus that sits alongside, but equally as important to the traditional time, cost, and quality metrics that most project teams are focused heavily on. I think it's also really important to remember that any project or program team is only a temporary entity who are typically only together for the duration of the project, whereas the true owners of the outcome and the true holders of the risk are the permanent business divisions who will be there enduring beyond this temporary project phase. So, keeping that in mind, I think it's really important that as change practitioners, we are providing that trusted advisor partnership with our business leaders to make sure they are directing the project and the program. And although there may be some very senior, very experienced project and program people who are leading this out, it is the business that really has the final say on whether or not the capabilities that are being introduced are going to work for the business in the long term. So, our outcome that we were able to achieve by really positioning change as a trusted advisor to both business and project and ensuring that benefits, readiness, and adoption were central to the conversation all the way through is that despite some complexities that we achieved or that we experienced, at the go live, we were able to maintain our product loadout throughout this go live period. And I mentioned before, I've not seen a go live of this nature that hasn't had one or two things that don't work quite as expected. And the real point of difference was the willingness of our teams to overcome those obstacles in the moment, under pressure, doing something new in a heightened state. If we get our team members to quickly identify what the issues are, escalate those to the right people, and come to the table to help create a solution together, you will find that your velocity and your momentum and the teamwork that's built throughout that process will carry things forward in those early go live days. The other really amazing outcome that we found is that through this work of partnering together, identifying risks, working on overcoming challenges and obstacles, is that were far stronger relationships and far much more trust was built between the people in the project. So we're talking BAs, project managers, and SMEs sitting within the project or the business. They really found this point of collaboration, which allowed future projects to go much more quickly because there was already a layer of trust that both teams would be listening and both teams would be working collaboratively for a shared outcome. The fantastic thing for our organization is this has now become the new benchmark for how we approach major initiatives, be it small technology deployments, medium-sized business and personnel change, or large transformation initiatives. That's been a really great thing that we have found is that once you establish this as a benchmark for success, your future changes will go more quickly and you'll be able to do them more efficiently. We really focused as a change service on looking at change as both a process that can be followed. We're tool agnostic, so we take a number of different approaches from places like proxy from the Change Management Institute and other well-known change models, and we adapt them for the situation and the size of the issue that we are dealing with. What we've always focused on is change being a process to achieve an outcome, but also on a deeper level, change being an inherent capability within our organization. We can always teach our people who are impacted by change how to take ownership and responsibility and self-manage and ask for help when they need it. Our leaders, as the people who need to coach, overcome obstacles, they need to be working with their team to overcome resistance. And our senior leaders on how to sponsor and champion change from the front and be there as the backstop to remove barriers and obstacles. We've absolutely found that implementing change as a process alongside change as a capability is the way that you can build not just a change ready, but a change hungry organization that can take advantages of opportunities to be your point of difference in whatever marketplace you're operating in. The other outcome that we really found was most important to those who were leading this particular change was the business readiness and then the rapid adoption and return to our business as usual velocity. So I spoke a little bit before about our learners with different needs and different opportunities to attend learning. So we had a fabulous learning team led by the wonderful Ruth Blaine and supported by Campbell Mulder, and we had others who joined us along the way. One of the things that really worked was spending more time in the familiarization space, creating short video content, as I talked about, quick cheat sheets that could be placed in the point in plant at the point that people would need the reference material, and using that familiarization so that by the time we came to either online classroom or team-led learning with our end users, we had them at a point where the fear of the change was no longer the guiding thing. It was a hunger for change and a wondering how they were going to get this done on day one. What I think is most important is that you are working with your teams to expand the horizon of success, not from the day that things go live, but for the post go live period and the first 2 to 4 to 6 weeks following go live. Are you seeing the benefits that you were anticipating? And are you seeing the return to pre go live velocity? I've seen many teams have a celebration the day after go live. And I think it's our responsibility as change practitioners to guide and coach the business and project to really understand the work actually starts on the day after go live. That is absolutely not the finish line. That's going to be your start line. So we had a really robust post go live hypercare support model. We had a dedicated command center which co-located people from the business, the SME group, the BAs, the vendor, the technology, our support partners, all who were working around the clock in a co-located space. We had floor walkers who were able to be at each of the sites, who were able to transfer the knowledge that was needed at the time it was needed. And I think one of the things that made this really effective was the utilization of live chats through our Microsoft Teams platform. So we used live chats to ensure that people in various functional lines that perhaps sit in remote locations from each other were able to keep up a constant dialogue with both the command center and their peers at other locations to quickly identify what was working, what might be a challenge, and if there were any manual workarounds that had been identified in one site, they were able to be absolutely communicated to the other sites without delay. This command center enabled us to provide immediate support and escalation for any P1 or P2 issues and make sure that as new learnings were identified during that go live period, we were able to then communicate those out by way of FAQs to our on-site locations. It wouldn't be a great masterclass if we didn't stop and have a little talk about some of the lessons that we learned along the way. So as I mentioned before, it's going to be absolutely imperative for any kind of transformation or go live change of this magnitude. You have a really strong change sponsor who is sitting at the top table. I'm a really big fan of any large transformation initiative having both a GM or executive sponsor as well as a change sponsor who is able to provide the change business practitioners with another avenue to have conversations about risk, about issues, about go live concerns, so that these can be discussed at the appropriate level at the appropriate time. I think in order to really inform that change sponsor to do their job is making sure that your change practitioners are having a regular connection with those GM leaders. And in those conversations, making sure that you absolutely understand what are the KPIs and the driving forces with each of the business units that you are working with. So you're able to position a lot of the outcomes of the work that's being done as solutions to problems those business users already have, as opposed to the change being a problem that the business is going to have to solve. The third most important lesson learned that we have, I think it's really important that change practitioners have an offline risk register. Now, I'm absolutely advocating for shared planning between change and project teams are held in a master schedule. I think that work management and task management should be a blended affair. That is delegating work to the best placed resource, and capacity comes into that as well. But there are at times risks that are probably not appropriate to place in the shared risk register. So in general, risks that are relating to adoption, that are relating to benefit, and they're relating to generic challenges within your area should be held on the master risk register for the project. But I think it's also really important that you keep an offline register of some of the risks that might be emerging that actually perhaps sit with personnel within the project or the business team, so that you can have that conversation with your GM leads and find out ways of mitigating and mobilizing the work that may be needed to be done to raise capability or to identify expectations for some of those who may present a risk to your business or your project go live. And the final one there, which I really love, as change practitioners, every day is a joy. And we need to really make sure that we are starting every day fresh with a belief that things can and will change. Our job is to make sure that the people we are working with can see the vision and have confidence in the validity of the change that we're going through. And so I think that's a really personal, internal one. And I've added a fun little quote at the bottom there. Look, maybe the pessimist or the optimist won't change the outcome, but the optimist sure has a more enjoyable week. The final piece that I have here is just a little bit of a reflection about what it has meant for us on winning this Global Change Award in the discipline of project and change partnership. So it wouldn't be fair to conclude this presentation without calling out two of our wonderful project partners, Rowena Woolgar and Danny Martirana, who were absolutely instrumental in creating the environment where change was a trusted partner and a true member of this community that was driving this change. And this integrated governance that we now have is the norm for everything that we do here. So the model that we utilized and proved the success of, and we were able to have that internationally recognized through the Global Change Awards, has been now replicated across all of our large projects, ensuring this wonderful cross-functional alignment from day one. Our leader-led change is now embedded in our culture as standard. And so we're really breaking down the barriers between change practitioner being sort of a special, magical, mystical function as opposed to something that everybody is accountable and responsible for. Leading change is now embedded as one of our core behavioral values as an organization. And that's allowed us to utilize our change specialist team to grow the overall capability and to lean in the large, most important initiatives, while the smaller ones are able to take care of themselves because of the lessons that were learned and the capability that was built through the delivery of our ERP transformation. And the final one we have down here is that iterative improvement has become a way of life. So the adaptability and the flexibility of teams to pivot. I've talked a little bit about risk management and risk identification. And if you're unable to kind of move and find your way through these challenges, you're going to find out that your end goal is not going to be met. So continuous refinement, being open to changing things, whether that be the direction, the go live, the number of people, the type of people involved, that will always make sure that your business change is more adaptive and more resilient. So it's been an absolute joy being able to lead this organization through this transformational change. We had some wonderful change practitioners who were along the way. So I wanted to also make a mention of our change sponsor, Stephanie Manning, who made much of this possible. We had Sue Harris, we had Pip Nolan, we had Haley Thomas Stokes, who were all core members of our change team. We had Laura Brown and a few others who joined us along the way, have really made the difference in terms of making the mark and growing the change capability, not just of the organization, but of our entire global community through trialing and adopting our practices to match the situation at hand. That brings us to the end of our conversation today in our mini masterclass on change and project partnership. I think if we think about our key points from today, it's making sure that change and project are absolute partners with a strong sponsorship in the business, looking for the longer term benefits and outcomes that go well beyond go live. We're looking at shared planning holding shared risk registers between project and change. And I think it's really important that your change service and your change practitioners are absolutely rock solid on what the principles are around the difference between a change resource and a project resource. And so they can refer back to those principles and use them as education and coaching tools throughout the life cycle of your project. I think becoming the trusted advisor is absolutely key to having influence. And we talked about the change being sort of the internal assurance for the business on the project. So to be able to provide that assurance role and to call things out and to raise risks and issues while still maintaining a cohesive collaborative relationship really takes some internal fortitude. And I think it's really important that those who are leading change, as I mentioned, start fresh each day, and the door is always open for a productive relationship. I think the other really key thing is to always remember that change management activities are always a mitigation to a risk that is placing adoption or business outcomes at risk. And so, if you can adopt that mindset, you're able to talk in a language that really works for your business users, and you will find that you get the backing and the mobilization of support and help when you need it. And I think the final thing I'll put in there is regarding escalation, it is absolutely a responsibility to escalate to and escalate through. You should have always had a conversation with the parties involved about where you see risk emerging. And I think it's really important that when you're dealing with your co-workers or with your business, when you're starting to hear frustration, when you're starting to hear anxiety, when you're starting to hear things that relate to fear, you're most often dealing with someone who is trying to articulate to you risk that is emerging. So our team have been really quick to adopt AI tools as automatic note takers. And we've found it's absolutely been so wonderfully powerful to have people monologue into some kind of AI tool, take their frustrations or complaints and turn them back into the language of risk. And that's how you can take that two-way conversation and really make a difference. That brings us to the end of our talk today. Thank you so much, Margot, for creating this forum for us. Thank you to everybody in Alliance who was either in the project, in the business, or in the support teams. And finally, to our Chief Executive Sponsor, Vili Visa, who made all of this possible. Thank you so much, Margot.
Wow, this was phenomenal. So I'm just going to move us to questions. I was noting my own questions as I was getting along and listening to you. It is actually phenomenal. I think the first question I have is, what was the ratio between, because your core group of people that were impacted by this change was about 500, right? What was the ratio of, if you wish, projects team and the change team versus that audience? If you don't mind thinking about this, and then the follow-up question is that I believe, or my observation is that sometimes, if not in majority of projects that I've observed, we don't have enough people to support such a big change. And given what you've shared in terms of the deliverables and the lessons learned and what people were doing in general, it seems that you had enough people to do the actual job that needed to be done. So it was you were in this fantastic position as a company whereby everybody had a role to play and they were capable of doing it because they had time to do that.
That is a great question, Margot. I would like to think of our change and learning teams as actually small but mighty. So if we think about ratios, for the most part, our change team was really only probably five as a core, which occasionally scaled up or down depending on the phase of the project we were at, and a
Mhm.
learning team of a similar size, kind of 3 to 4 people scaling up and down. If we compare that to the project resources, I'm sure there was probably around 50 people in the project program team at various times. So in terms of ratio, the change in learning function were far smaller. But I talked a little bit about leveraging your business resources to become an extended change and learning team. And so what we were able to do was utilize a train the trainer model, right? So we grabbed a number of people who had either the desire or the capability or the personality type to become learners. And so our learning team were really great at finding creative solutions. A lot of what we did was under really strict budget constraints. A lot of what we did, we weren't able to bring in the pool of resources that we really would have liked. So we had to think creatively. And so I think being honest about the amount of time you require from your business resources and building that into your project plan and communicating that out through your business integration group or otherwise forum so that you can release the people in the business that you need to build the momentum and land this thing. So we were probably, yep, as I said, a small but mighty team with the change in learning practitioners being far smaller than the general project pool, but leveraging our BAs, our SMEs, and our other business and project resources to become an extended change in learning group.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And I understand perhaps also you had a in terms of training, you maybe had some training program already pre-designed by the ERP developer, or was it something that the team had to do from scratch? Because the things like, like you've mentioned, the cheat sheets, the how-to videos, things that are very quick and very very easily done, but also very easily accessible to others are always very lovely. But we very often, when there is a large implementation of a new system, the system learning is overcoming everything else.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So, in most of the projects I've been involved with, your vendor, your provider, your software manufacturer will always give you a baseline of tools, learning, or contextual help. But I think that it really comes down to the skills and the talents of your internal learning team that are able to take that generic material and turn it into what your organization needs to be successful. Because as we talked about, we're not actually implementing a system, we're implementing a business capability. And so a lot of what somebody needs in the moment is actually a combination of the technical steps, but also the business rules and the context as to, sure, I might know how to process this transaction, but is this what I should be doing right now? So we probably created the majority of our videos, our learning materials as bespoke items. And so we used, short video content, as I said, the cheat sheets, and our organization runs off kind of standard operating procedures, which is where we put together the combination of system steps and business rules and contextual workflows. So our training team absolutely shouldered a really heavy burden because it's not really just what they need to learn, it's the why they are learning it and the how they're going to implement it in true business practice. So I definitely don't think you should reinvent the wheel and start from scratch, but I absolutely would not think you should approach a change of this magnitude thinking that the canned material from your vendor is going to do the job in landing the training and learning in your business.
Yeah, yeah, and we shared the same observation, but I was just curious, how did you do this over there? Um, I also have a few more questions. If people are keen to ask some questions, please do so as part of the chat. I'll just go ahead and have a look. How did you track the benefits? Because one of the things that I have observed is very often, and especially in larger and more complex organization, there is a bit of a, I would call it detachment between somebody who has made a decision and paid the money to, let's say, implement a new software across the whole organization versus the benefits tracking. Because at some point, the benefits, at a very, very high level, the benefits would have been associated with things like I don't know, legacy systems, lack of support of the legacy systems, for example, or that would be the need of change, or pardon me, or some financial aspects. But really, how do you ensure you track and first of all you outline what the benefits are upfront for all of your audiences because very often it's not an easy thing to do and again, this comes from practice. Although we do outline those benefits as part of the case for change at the very beginning, and often change management, organizational change management capability is part of that case for change. The the way that the project is being led, the benefits would have been kind of left at the very end.
Mm,
We are doing, we are going, but really at the very end, we may see if the benefits are there. And I think it also very, I'm not sure if you've heard about this, and at this point, I'm just really not sure if this is a lie or true, but the 70% projects fail sentence, apparently, right? And I do wonder whether this is something to do with the benefits tracking. If assuming this is correct, okay, at the very beginning we had those five benefits, but in the end we've got X and Y, and maybe we haven't tracked it correctly. So just curiosity, how did you manage to track all those benefits, and did you track it across different audiences, or was it something like more of a holistic approach?
mm. Yeah, I think the whole topic of benefits management, benefit realization, benefit tracking is an absolutely fascinating one. I think in my experience, iterative kind of sprint-based deployment, it's a lot easier to manage and measure the benefits as you go along. And I think one of the things you said is really important, making sure that the benefits of the outcomes are actually clearly identified at the beginning point gives you a place to be aiming for. I think the other really important thing is that the benefits, it's a living document, so there's many projects I've seen, there's been a scope, there's been some kind of budget, there's been some kind of benefits document that sort of gets filed away and never gets picked up again, hopefully in 2 years to see if the whole thing worked, but perhaps it never does. And so your conversation about return on investment, I think, is really important. So I think number one, making sure that the benefits documentation tracking is a living activity that actually happens like risk all of the way through. I think when you have a large go live like we did, the thing that I really focus on is adoption metrics. So if you take what the benefits are, you should be outlining the benefit owners. And so these are your senior executives who are signing up to support this because there is going to be some kind of return on investment to the organization, and making sure that that ownership and that responsibility for making those changes, whether it be efficiency, whether it be increased capability, sales, contribution margin, whatever it may be, that those things are revisited on a regular basis to make sure that they are still true, that they are still achievable, and that, as I talked about before, that you're adapting and monitoring what it is that you're doing in response to risk. And so you may have a risk to benefits, which should be in your risk register, and then you have some certain mitigations to say, well, actually, do we drop this part of the project if it's not going to deliver the benefits any longer? I also think that sort of the non-financial benefits are also often perhaps underlooked. So financial benefits are easier to measure. So we certainly measure adoption metrics, and then we look at business KPIs. So return to an improvement on our overarching business KPIs as measures for success. But in this presentation, we've talked about all of those other business benefits, such as increased capability, the ability to have a smaller practitioner team in future, for the growth of our organization to become more adaptable in this kind of a VUCA environment that we're in now. All of those non-tangible benefits, I think it is the role and the responsibility of the change practitioners to be capturing, articulating. And again, that's why it's important to have that voice at steering, so that this conversation can stay above the table and for everybody to share.
Yeah, I love that as well, because it's very interesting that like you said, in the VOCA world, as we have at the moment, we tend to, in organizations, tend to forget that the core of your organization are your people. So you need to make sure that they have all the tools and capabilities and networks in place, so they can reiterate, they can make mistakes, they can come back and improve continuously. And we are talking about it, but not very often we can see that in practice. There was one point in your presentation when when you said that what we have realized now is that we have built the trust. So people know what to expect from one another. And if the new project comes in, they already know who to pull information from and who needs to be part of that core group of individuals who are perhaps at the steering, not necessarily steering committee, but from the project perspective, on the project and on the project side rather than the business side. So for me, that's fantastic, because often we don't see that. Again, we just don't see that. You have a project that sits somewhere separately, and then you have the business that sits somewhere separately, and that part of benefits is not tracked nor uh, endorsed at all.
Yeah, well said.
All right. Look, I don't have any more questions. I'm just looking at the time. What I wanted to say is that, oh, there you go. We have Sally here. So, if people wanted to connect to Sally, please do so. From the Change Awards point of view, this recording will be available to everybody, and if people wanted to access it later on, they can. We will also prepare a key talking points that Sally have mentioned. So it's then very easy to kind of think about maybe in the future in your own projects what should or shouldn't be done. Um, Again, plenty of things. My view is that this project has gone through a lot of things and have prepared a fantastic framework, I would say, um, like a like a blueprint really of how to make sure that your projects are successful. Because a couple of things that Sally haven't mentioned, and I thought maybe she will mention, is that didn't you do this project within like 9 months or something?
We probably took a little bit longer to do that, but we certainly shaved off some time
Yeah.
in terms of the deployment and then the return to business BAU. So yeah, it was a pretty challenging project, but we absolutely got there in the end.
Yes, yes, exactly. Well, in that case, everybody, thank you very much for joining the session. Sally, I hope you have a lovely day and your first coffee awaits you so early in the morning. And have a nice day. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Margot.
Thanks, thanks. Bye bye.